I've had a lot of conversations over the years.
I heard that actually, when you've done like your 100,000th interview, wherever you are, the ceiling opens up and it's all confetti comes down and
I
dancing
hope
girls.
so.
Tell us a little bit about the format of the Lindisfarne story. What actually happens when people show up there?
Well, it's a show, but it's quite an informal show. It's a sort of a cross between an evening with and a presentation and a gig, really. Myself and Billy, we play sitting down. Well, I always do. I'm the drummer, but he plays sitting down with guitar, vocals, and me doing bits of percussion. And we have and we chat. We tell stories. We also have a screen, and we show bits of video and lots of old images and relevant to whatever we happen to be talking about. And we try and show. We've got a vast catalogue and library of stuff, as you can imagine, haven't been going as long as we have. So we try and surprise people with things they might not have seen before, heard before. Um, you know, I mean, my old analogy was, everybody knows the album sleeve cover, but we showed them the one we didn't use because somebody was scratching their backside or something like that. We we just try and vary it and have a bit of fun with it. But it's quite informal, and we try and get inside the songs and reasons behind stuff and things like that.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question you've probably been asked many, many times before, which is why did the band choose the name Lindisfarne?
Well, it wasn't our idea. Um, when we were signed by Charisma Records in 1970, our name was Brethren, and we'd had a lot of names. The band had actually been going since about 1965, 66 in various forms, gradually coalescing together, like they do. But we were Brethren at the time, and we were rehearsing up here. There's a guy called John Anthony who was sort of house producer for Charisma Music. He came up to Newcastle to spend some time with us and go through tunes. And we were sitting in Rod Clement's house, about half a mile from where I'm sitting now, um, after we'd been making some music and we were having a cup of tea or something and a bit crack on. And Simon, our guitar player Simon, just happened to mention Lindisfarne. Happened to mention it because I think he'd just been up there recently. His family were quite posh. They had money. So when he was young, they used to go up there and go horse riding and stuff like that. So he happened to mention it, and we knew we were looking for a new name. And John Anthony just stopped, basically nearly choked on his tea and put his cup of tea down and says, "That's the name. That would be perfect." Because we knew we were looking for something that had some sort of northeastern connotation. Because we knew we had a sound that was sort of redolent of where we came from. It had elements of what of of the personality of the region, if you like, in it. And also we knew what we didn't want. We didn't want, at the time there was lots of bands like sort of like Deep Purple and that's those sorts of names, and we didn't want to be the something.
Uh-huh.
So we knew what we didn't want, and then he came up with that, and at first it sounded a bit odd. It was a bit like, I don't know, if you lived in Birmingham, calling yourself Dudley or something. You know what I mean? It seemed a bit odd because it was so close to us. But they tried it out with the record company and said, "What do you think?" And they loved it. So after about 2 or 3 days, we sort of thought, okay, that'll do. It's as good as anything. And it certainly wasn't any of the things we didn't want.
It does, it somehow it seems the perfect name for the band.
Well, it does now, but you don't know. It's cause and effect, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's hard to say.
I don't know.
I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. But I mean, it's funny, like, because when you go back over the years, one of the things we come up with in the story is like other titles we had for albums that got ditched, things like that. And then you can't imagine that set of tunes with any other name than what it has, any other title. You know what I mean? But it could have been something different. It's interesting concept.
Just for anyone who doesn't know, and we do have quite a lot of overseas viewers and listeners online. Lindisfarne, of course, is I think I'm right in saying the translation that is Holy Island. Am I correct about that, or you're not
That's
sure?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Most people saw the island. It's got two names.
And do you know the history? Just in two minutes, do you know the history of the actual Lindisfarne?
I know some of the history. I know that Saint Bede lived there and Saint Cuthbert lived there. It was a centre of Christianity in very early days of Christianity. It had a monastery on there. It was the first place to be attacked by the Vikings in Britain. Or first recorded place. Maybe probably because they were the only people that could write on the island, so they were the only people that reported it. Who knows? And it was for a long, long time. It was a very obviously because it's an island twice a day when the tide comes in. And it was an isolated little community with fishing, basically, a little bit of tourism. It's changed a lot now, but we've still got friends up there. Myself and my wife go up there, a couple of times a year, have a couple of nights, and see old friends. Yeah.
Back to the band. I think there's enough distance in time that I can ask you about this. As with any band, there are always tensions within a band, or there almost always are, and things change and things happen. If you look back now, because obviously at different points in the group's history, it kind of split up and came back together and so on and so forth. How much of those divisions were to do with artistic differences and how much were they to do with just personality?
Um, Possibly personality, well, a little bit of both, really. I mean, the first split after in our first really successful period, when we split into two, basically, was predominantly because we were managed by the record company, which is something you should never do, because there's nobody to fight your corner. There was we were we were the cash cow at the time. We were the only band on the label making any money, so they were very keen for keep us working, keep new albums and everything. And it got to a situation where they were wanting another album, and we didn't really have the songs because Alan found that he couldn't write when he was working. He had his own way of doing it, and he wrote the majority of the songs, and he needed to be at home really, and having time to think and time to process stuff. He couldn't. He wrote a couple of songs when we were traveling, but very, very few. So he wasn't happy with the way things were. And at one point, it was a consideration was we were going to sort of. I don't know if you remember what happened with Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys back in the day, where he went off the road. He was still involved in writing the songs and recording them, but he didn't tour for quite a long time. We were going to do the same thing. That was the plan. And Billy Mitchell, who came in, was been a friend of ours from day one. He was going to come in the road band. That's what we were going to do, and that was the plan for about a week. In which during that time, Billy had been contacted. He was in Canada at the time and had agreed to come. And then by the time we made plans and came, Alan had changed his mind, and the record company had put pressure on him to keep things together. So so that was what it was. That was the reason for the first one. Alan was unhappy. He was sick of touring, and because of various things, you squabble internally about stuff like that. It was. I mean, now looking back on it, it's not surprising. Alan was a family man. He had 3 kids. Two of us were still single, and living the life of Riley, we would have travelled all around the world permanently. That was great as far as we were concerned. So it was inevitable. But the benefit of it was we did have that split. For 3 years, we all went off and did different things, although we still remained pals. I mean, the initial sort of fallout, if you like, only lasted a few weeks because we had the same social circles. So we were seeing each other in ones and twos all the time anyway. But that 3 years apart musically made a massive difference. And when we did come back together again in '76 for initially a one-off, we were a much stronger unit because we realized what the strengths we had before, and we'd all learnt a lot in the 3 years, so it worked. So after that, we never really had any major upsets after that. It was a couple of bits and pieces, but nothing you wouldn't. I would put it like a family, sort of little family spats now and then, but nothing serious.
Alan Hull is kind of like a fascinating character. For anyone who doesn't know, he was the original lead singer of the band and sadly passed away in more recent times. Tell us a little bit about him and his character and what he got up to.
Right. Well, Alan was a couple of years older than the rest of us. He'd been in a successful band, that had a record deal and had a radio show and stuff, and a sponsor, which was unheard of. When we were still sort of playing around youth clubs and bars, he was doing proper gigs and proper tours and things. The band was called The Chosen Few. That broke up, and he ended up back in Newcastle. and he was struggling to find musicians he could work with. So he took a job. He took a job as a psychiatric nurse, and he was doing that for 2.5 years through 66, 67, early 68, I think it was. And that became, well, it was very valuable to him because he was always fascinated by the way people's brains work, and and working every day with people with those sorts of, well, basically seeing the world from a different perspective was where he put it. Um, it illuminated his writing. It really did. It made a huge difference to what he was writing about. Um, and we met him not long after he'd quit doing that, and he was trying to make his way as a solo performer. I did a few sessions for him in the studio, playing on his tracks. He used to come along to our shows, and then we used to go to his. By shows, I mean pubs and back rooms of bars and things. Um, and it became apparent very quickly that we were a force to be reckoned with together. But he was always the dominant songwriter because he was so prolific and he had so much stuff. But he was also very supportive of the other writers in the band. He loved, I mean, I remember when the Dingley Dell album, which was the third album we made in the first incarnation of the band, he thought that Rod's song "Don't Ask Me." Rod had one song on the album called "Don't Ask Me," and Alan was convinced that was the best song on the record. So he was always very keen on promoting himself, but he was also supportive of everyone else in the band.
Am I right that he got involved with politics for a while?
All his life, yeah. I mean, he was very left wing. He was once he was, and then he put him up to be an MP, to be a Labour MP. He stood as a councillor once, but got very, very slightly pipped at the post by the local then Lib Dem, I think he was. I think that's what they were called then. Can't remember. Or it might have been the Liberal. That really irked him. He wasn't happy about that. But we all were. I mean, we were all not necessarily card carrying members of the Labour Party, but we were all left inclined, and we did a lot of work supporting the miners and the miners' strike, and we did lots of benefits for various people, shipyard workers when they were on strike, etc. But because Alan could go out and play on his own, he went off and did lots of benefits here, there, and everywhere. So he got, everybody thought it was just him, but it was all of us really.
Right, just to wrap up with, let's come back to the Lindisfarne story. You got a bunch of dates coming up. I noticed you're going through a number of places in the northeast and a little bit in Cumbria, and you're also coming up here to Scotland, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. I noticed a lot of these gigs, and I'm sure it's not a coincidence. You could almost go home each night after them and then do the next one.
Yeah, well, that's for a reason. We're not mad keen, we're all cracking on a bit now, We love doing the shows, but we're not mad keen on carousing around the country, we'll do the show, have a nice, a beer after the show, and then come home. It's nice.
No,
There's a few nights.
I consider that genius, not that's the
No,
privilege of age.
yeah, absolutely. Well, no, we love. I mean, we every time we do this tour, we have a great time and think, when we're going to do it again, and then other things get in the way. I mean, it's 3 years since we've done it.
Right.
It's such good fun, and we've got lots of pals all around the country. I mean, we do get repeat listeners, repeat customers. Who come to every time we play, they come and see something, which is why we always make the show a bit different. It's always got a different theme. This time we're concentrating on album number 1, on Nicely Out of Tune, and the songs in that album were quite disparate, quite interesting, really. If a band was, a band's debut album and you're making a statement, ours was a bit of a strange one because they're quite different songs. So it's going to be an interesting show.